The hum of the air filtration system was the only constant companion in the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite. It was a sterile, almost surgical sound, designed to eradicate any stray particle that might contaminate the delicate ecosystems of evidence I meticulously cultivated on my workspace. Under the unforgiving glare of the overhead luminaires, every speck, every fiber, every microscopic anomaly stood in stark relief. This was my domain, a quiet battleground where truth was coaxed from silence. Today, my focus was a tragedy, officially. Dr. Aris Thorne, a name whispered with reverence in the closed circles of bioengineering, was gone. His state-of-the-art lab, a fortress of innovation, had become a tomb of twisted metal and pulverized composites. The initial reports, relayed by a harried field agent, painted a grim picture, a catastrophic energy release, an explosion of unimaginable force that had shredded the very structure designed to contain Thorne's groundbreaking, potentially world-altering, research. Suicide, some suggested, overwhelmed by the pressure. A tragic miscalculation, others offered, a brilliant mind pushing the boundaries too far. I didn't deal in suggestions or theories, only facts. And right now, the facts were a collection of charred fragments and vaporized dreams, painstakingly catalogued and delivered to my suite. A low-frequency vibration resonated through the floor from the massive industrial shredder 2 levels down, reminding me of the sheer volume of material that had passed through this division recently. Before me, on a pristine white examination table, lay a segment of what was once a control panel. It was roughly the size of my hand, a warped composite of high-grade polymers and interwoven carbon fibers, designed to withstand extreme temperatures and pressures. Most of its surface was blackened, blistered, and scored by what looked like shrapnel from within the lab. The edges were vitrified, melted into smooth, glassy curves, consistent with intense, uncontrolled heat. This was the kind of damage I'd expect from a core breach, a runaway reaction. It fit the narrative. I adjusted the articulated arm of the stereo microscope, bringing its twin lenses to bear on the damaged panel. The magnification instantly transformed the rough texture into a lunar landscape of craters and ridges. I systematically scanned the surface, moving in slow, deliberate increments, my eye trained for anything that deviated from the expected pattern of destruction. My fingers, encased in nitrile gloves, occasionally brushed the cold metal of the table, a grounding sensation in the abstract world of magnified details. The air in the suite was filtered, scentless, yet I could almost detect the ghostly residue of the lab's final moments, the acrid tang of burnt polymers, the metallic ozone of an arc flash, the faint, disturbing hint of something biological, now inert. My mind reconstructed the scene, piecing together the chaos from these silent witnesses. My gaze settled on a small, untouched section of the panel, nestled between 2 deeper scorch marks. It was an anomaly, a tiny island of relative preservation amidst the widespread devastation. Here, the carbon fiber weave was still discernible, not completely obliterated. I nudged the fragment with a pair of fine-tipped tweezers, rotating it slightly to catch the light at a different angle. That's when I saw it. A minuscule burn pattern, no larger than a grain of rice, etched into the polymer coating. It wasn't a random splatter or a heat bloom from general combustion. This mark was different. It was a perfect, almost geometric oval, sharply defined, with edges that looked as if they'd been cut with an invisible laser. The material within the oval was not blistered or charred in the way the surrounding panel was. Instead, it was subtly discolored, a faint, almost translucent amber, as if it had been briefly superheated from within or by a focused beam of extreme precision. There was no soot, no accompanying microfractures. Radiating outwards, none of the typical signs of a violent, uncontrolled thermal event. The adjacent scorch marks were chaotic, wide, and deep, indicative of a massive energy discharge. This oval, however, was surgical. It spoke of control, of intent, of something applied with incredible precision before or during the wider, more destructive event, yet somehow separate from it. It was like finding a perfect pinprick on a canvas shredded by a hurricane. My breath hitched, a subtle tightening in my chest. The official narrative, the one about a catastrophic accident or a desperate suicide, began to fray at the edges. A miscalculation wouldn't leave such a clean, deliberate mark. An explosion wouldn't focus energy with such singular intent. This wasn't chaos. This was design. I leaned closer to the microscope, adjusting the focus with minute care. It wasn't carbon, nor any common byproduct of the other materials present. It was something else entirely. The lab wasn't just destroyed, I realized. It had been targeted, and Dr. Aris Thorne's death, far from an accident, was beginning to look like a meticulously orchestrated act. My work, I knew, had only just begun. It was a sterile, almost surgical sound, designed to eradicate any stray particle that might contaminate the delicate ecosystems of evidence I meticulously cultivated on my workbench. Today, however, my focus wasn't on a workbench, but on the cold, stainless steel table where the remains of Aris Thorne lay. The forensic pathologist, a quiet, methodical specialist whose gloved hands moved with practiced precision, peeled back the final layer of sheeting. The air, despite the filtration, seemed to thicken with the scent of ozone and something else, something acrid and metallic. Thorne's body was a landscape of stark contrasts. Extensive charring marred his torso and left arm, consistent with the initial reports of a flash fire. Yet, the burns didn't tell the whole story. Preliminary findings confirmed severe thermal trauma, the pathologist stated, her voice low, almost a murmur against the drone of the ventilation. She gestured with a forceps to a particularly deep burn on Thorne's bicep. The depth and pattern here suggest exposure to an extremely high, localized heat source, but the surrounding tissue shows surprisingly little radiant damage. Almost as if the heat was channeled, contained. My eyes traced the pathologist's pointer. He was right. The edges of the severe burns were unnaturally sharp, almost like a stencil had been used, rather than the more diffuse, gradient damage I'd expect from a widespread explosion or a general lab fire. My determination hardened. This wasn't a simple accident. And the cause of death? I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet. Officially, massive organ failure due to systemic shock from the burns and trauma, she replied, her gaze meeting mine. But there's an anomaly. No soot in the trachea or lungs. Not a trace. He wasn't breathing when the fire reached its peak intensity. My breath caught. No soot. That meant Thorne was either already dead, or incapacitated to the point of not breathing, before the most damaging heat event occurred. That complicated everything. A lab accident usually meant a struggle, an attempt to escape, an inhalation of smoke and fumes. This suggested a different timeline entirely. I leaned closer, my gaze sweeping over the body, searching for the microscopic threads that often unraveled the most tangled narratives. The pathologist continued her observations, detailing internal damage, but my attention was snagged by something minute, almost invisible, nestled in the singed fabric of Thorne's lab coat, near the collarbone. With a pair of fine tweezers, I carefully extracted the particle. It felt gritty, almost crystalline. I brought it under a portable microscope I carried, adjusting the focus. Under magnification, the speck revealed itself to be not a crystal, but an aggregate of what looked like pollen, yet unlike any common variety I'd ever encountered. Its structure was complex, almost fractal, with tiny, barbed appendages. "What is this?" I murmured, more to myself than to the pathologist. She peered over my shoulder. "Unusual. Definitely not a lab contaminant. And I haven't seen anything like it from local flora." This was it. My unique trace element. Thorne, or something that touched him, had been exposed to this. It didn't belong in a high-security research lab, a place meticulously designed to exclude external biological agents. This was an outside signature, a whisper of another location, another environment. Thorne hadn't died in a simple accident. He'd been murdered. Later, I sat in a cramped interview room, the sterile white walls doing little to calm the agitated air. The lead detective on the case, a grizzled veteran named Miller, sat opposite me, his notepad open, a pen poised. "So, the preliminary findings?" Miller asked, his eyes sharp, accustomed to reading between the lines. "Inconsistent with a straightforward lab accident," I stated, relaying the pathologist's observations and my own discovery of the unique pollen. "No soot in the lungs, extreme localized burns. A non-lab related trace element. It suggests Thorne was incapacitated or dead before the main thermal event, and that something from outside the lab was introduced." Miller grunted, leaning back. "Complicates things. We've got two initial persons of interest. You want to hear it?" "I do," I confirmed, my mind already sifting through possibilities, trying to connect the pollen to potential scenarios. "First, Dr. Silas Vance," Miller began, ticking off a finger. "Another bioengineer, head of a competing division at the same corporate research facility. Known academic rival of Thorne's. Apparently, their work overlapped significantly, and Thorne had a reputation for being fiercely competitive, secretive even." Vance expressed considerable frustration with Thorne's methods and lack of collaboration. Motive, professional jealousy, intellectual theft, the drive to secure his own legacy. Thorne's world-changing research would be a significant prize. "And the second?" I prompted. "Maya." "Thorne's former research assistant," Miller said, ticking another finger. "He was let go about 6 weeks ago." Abruptly. No reason given. Thorne was known for being demanding, a perfectionist, but the termination seemed particularly harsh. She's since been vocal about her belief that Thorne sabotaged her career, spread rumors about her competence. She has access credentials to the facility, though not to Thorne's specific lab. But she knows the layout, the security protocols, the ins and outs of the whole operation. And she's got a strong motive for revenge. Maya. Disgruntled, knowledgeable, with a personal vendetta. Motive, revenge, a desire to destroy Thorne's reputation or work. The pollen, I thought, where could it fit? Could one of them have brought it in? Or could it point to a location they both might have visited, or perhaps even a third party? Miller closed his notepad. Neither Vance nor Maya have alibis that are ironclad enough to rule them out completely. and both knew Thorne's competitive nature, his secretive work. They had reason to be angry, perhaps even desperate. I nodded slowly, the pieces starting to churn in my mind. A rival driven by ambition, a former assistant fueled by vengeance. Both knew the intricate dance of the corporate research world. But neither scenario explained the surgical precision of the burns, nor the complete absence of soot. And definitely not that iridescent, barbed pollen. This wasn't just about motive, it was about method, about a level of sophistication that went far beyond a simple act of violence. And I was determined to uncover the true architect behind it. Fluorescent lights cast a cool, unforgiving glow over the array of monitors displaying fragmented data logs and encrypted directories. I sat before a terminal, my fingers dancing over the keyboard, navigating the digital labyrinth of Dr. Thorne's professional life. My colleague, a digital forensics specialist, worked silently beside me, her concentration a palpable force. He certainly didn't make it easy, I murmured, watching a progress bar crawl. Triple-layered encryption, custom algorithms. This wasn't just about securing intellectual property, it was about burying secrets. Or protecting something vital, the specialist countered without looking up, her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Thorne was renowned for his caution. Caution, or paranoia? The question hung in the air. The initial breach had been a painstaking process, but now we were deep inside, sifting through the digital detritus of a brilliant mind. Folder after folder revealed the scope of Thorne's work, advanced genetic sequencing, a project codenamed Prometheus. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about new medicines, this was about rewriting fundamental biological code. Potential applications spanned from eradicating inherited diseases to, in less ethical hands, crafting designer pathogens. The very thought sent a shiver down my spine, a cold counterpoint to the room's regulated temperature. My eyes scanned a timeline of file modifications. Most were routine, but a cluster of entries from the last few weeks stood out like bruised fruit on a pristine counter. Fragmented access logs, unusual IP addresses that bounced through a series of ghost servers, and then, the telltale sign of an attempted wipe. Not a clumsy deletion, but a sophisticated, multi-stage purge designed to leave no trace. Except, it had. The specialist's software was designed to find exactly these ghosts in the machine. Project Prometheus, specifically the vector synthesis subproject. Someone tried to scrub these files clean, less than 72 hours before Thorne's death. The specialist zoomed in, her brow furrowed. And not just deleted. These packets were overwritten multiple times, then fragmented, then an attempt to corrupt the index. Very deliberate. Very professional. Too professional for Thorne to just miscalculate, I mused, the pieces clicking into place. If he was alone, why the desperate attempt to hide this? And if someone else was involved, why only these specific files? The burn patterns, the absence of soot, all of it pointed to a controlled environment, a precise attack. And now, this digital ghost. It wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. Just then, the entrance chime sounded, signaling the arrival of Thorne's assistant, Maya. She entered the suite, her gaze darting around the room as if expecting to find Thorne himself lurking in the shadows. She clutched a worn leather folder to her chest. "Thank you for coming in, Maya," I said, rising to greet her. "We have a few more questions regarding Dr. of course, Reed." Anything I can do to help." She sat stiffly in the chair I offered, her movements hesitant. "We're looking into the Prometheus project," I began, choosing my words carefully. "Can you tell me about its most recent developments? Specifically, anything related to vector synthesis?" Maya's grip on her folder tightened, her knuckles white. He was very secretive about that part. Especially in the last few weeks. Said it was sensitive. Said he couldn't trust anyone. Anyone? I pressed gently. Did he elaborate? Did he suspect someone was trying to access his work? She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, her gaze fixed on the movement. He just changed. He started locking himself in, even from me. He'd leave the lab for hours, then come back looking exhausted, agitated. He'd mutter about eyes watching him, about the wrong people knowing. He was always careful, but this was different. He was paranoid. Paranoid how? I asked, leaning forward slightly. Did he mention specific threats? Rivals? Corporate espionage? Her head shook slowly. No names. Just a pervasive sense of being hunted. He installed new security protocols, changed his passwords daily. He even started carrying a small, encrypted drive with him everywhere, said it contained the truth. He never let it out of his sight. A small, encrypted drive. The thought hammered at me. If he was trying to hide something, or if someone was trying to steal something, that drive could be critical. And if he was carrying it everywhere, where was it now? Not found at the scene. Did he ever mention attempting to wipe data? I asked, watching her closely. She hesitated, then nodded. He was always meticulous about data hygiene, but lately, he was obsessively scrubbing old files, even things that seemed innocuous. He said he was clearing the decks for something new, something big. Thorne's paranoia, the sophisticated data manipulation, the attempted file wipe of the vector synthesis project, and the missing encrypted drive. It wasn't a tragic accident. It was a calculated act, and Thorne, whether as a victim or a participant, was deeply entangled in a dangerous game. The tension in the suite was no longer just the hum of machines, it was the silent scream of a conspiracy. I leaned over the console, my eyes fixed on the oscillating peaks and troughs of the spectral graph. It had been scraped from the underside of Thorne's workbench, a nearly invisible shard clinging to the rough-hewn surface, a surface already scarred by 1,000 experiments. My initial scan had flagged it as an anomaly, an elemental composition that didn't fit any standard lab material. Now, I was running a more exhaustive sweep, pushing the machine to its limits, trying to coax out every last secret embedded within its molecular structure. The display flickered, then stabilized. I cross-referenced the data against a specialized database, industrial composites, advanced manufacturing materials, high-performance alloys. The system churned, processing billions of data points in seconds. A single match flashed green. My breath hitched. It was a rare, synthetic polymer, a compound known for its extreme durability and resistance to thermal degradation. Not something you'd find in a typical bioengineering lab. This wasn't a material designed for biological research or even standard engineering. This was a component used in high-end industrial applications, often in environments demanding unparalleled structural integrity or specific shielding properties. Its presence in Thorne's lab was a profound discrepancy. I leaned back, the chair groaning softly under my weight. The implications hit me like a cold wave. If this polymer wasn't part of Thorne's legitimate research, then it had been introduced. And if it had been introduced, it pointed away from the initial theories of a catastrophic accident or even a rival academic's desperate act. This spoke to a level of resources, of specific manufacturing knowledge, that transcended individual ambition. This spoke to a corporation. Thorne had several major funding partners, but one name immediately surfaced in my mind: Omnicorp. A behemoth in advanced materials and proprietary research, known for its aggressive R&D acquisitions and its relentless pursuit of market dominance. They had a history of pushing boundaries, and sometimes, overstepping them. The vector synthesis project, Thorne's groundbreaking work, had been heavily backed by Omnicorp. The pieces shifted, interlocking with a chilling precision. Thorne's paranoia, the sophisticated data manipulation, the attempted file wipe, the missing encrypted drive, it all coalesced around the singular point of this polymer. My next move was clear. I contacted the lead investigator, requesting an immediate interview with Omnicorp's liaison to Thorne's project. The request was granted with surprising speed, almost too quickly. The Omnicorp corporate office was a study in polished steel and muted power. I sat across from the corporate liaison in a conference room that overlooked the city, the glass walls reflecting a pale, winter sky. The liaison, a sharp-suited executive with an uncomfortably smooth smile, exuded an aura of practiced calm. Reed, the liaison, began, gesturing vaguely with an open palm. We are, of course, absolutely devastated by Dr. Thorne's passing. A true visionary. Omnicorp is fully cooperating with your investigation. The voice was modulated, every word carefully placed. I appreciate that, I replied, my gaze steady. I'm looking into the materials used in Dr. Thorne's lab. Specifically, a rare synthetic polymer I've identified. It doesn't appear to be part of his published research. The liaison's smile didn't waver, but I caught a flicker in their eyes, a momentary tightening around the corners. A polymer, you say? Dr. Thorne was always experimenting. Pushing boundaries. It's entirely possible he was exploring new applications, perhaps even something for a future Omnicorp initiative we weren't privy to yet. This particular polymer, I pressed, is proprietary. Used in very specific, high-end industrial applications. Omnicorp manufactures a variant, doesn't it? We have many proprietary materials, Reed, the liaison said, the tone still genial, but a slight edge had crept in. Our R&D department is vast. Could you be more specific about the composition? I described the unique spectral signature, the elemental breakdown, without giving away the full scope of my findings. The liaison listened intently, nodding occasionally. Ah, yes, that does sound familiar. We do have a material with similar properties. It's used in, shall we say, specialized containment units. High-stress environments. But I assure you, it has no direct application in bioengineering. Yet a microscopic trace of it was found in Dr. Thorne's lab, near the point of the incident, I stated, watching for any tell. The liaison's eyes widened slightly, a performance of surprise. Is that so? Well, that is certainly Perplexing. I can only surmise it must have been an incidental contaminant. Perhaps carried in on someone's shoe, or a piece of equipment that passed through one of our manufacturing facilities. We have thousands of employees, read. Our supply chain is global. The explanation was too quick, too neat. Overly cooperative. Or perhaps, I suggested, leaning forward just slightly, it was part of something much larger. Something designed to withstand extreme conditions. Like, for instance, a catastrophic lab event. The liaison's smile finally faltered. Their hands, which had been resting casually on the polished table, now clasped together, fingers intertwining, then releasing. Reed, I understand your line of questioning, but Omnicorp has absolutely no involvement in Dr. Thorne's tragic demise. We have every incentive for his research to continue. His vector synthesis project was poised to revolutionize. Well, everything. Indeed, I said, rising from my seat. Revolutionize everything. And perhaps, for some, that revolution came with too many risks. The liaison stood as well, regaining their composure. We will provide you with any and all documentation you require regarding our materials, our personnel, our dealings with Dr. Thorne. Omnicorp has nothing to hide. I met their gaze. I'm sure you don't. But the tension in the room, thick and palpable, told a different story. It was leading me directly into the heart of Omnicorp, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that this was only the beginning of a much larger, and far more dangerous, investigation. The lingering pressure from the Omnicorp meeting still clung to me like ozone, a subtle hum of warning. But my focus, as always, pulled back to the tangible, the microscopic. My hands, steady and precise, worked under the magnification of the electron microscope, tracing the intricate molecular structure of the anomalous polymer found at Thorne's lab. The preliminary analysis had been intriguing, the full breakdown was proving even more so. This wasn't just a polymer. It was a highly specialized, self-sealing compound, designed for extreme temperature fluctuations and corrosive environments. The kind of material you'd find in advanced aerospace components or, more relevantly, cutting-edge biocontainment systems. The kind of material Thorne might have been experimenting with for his own groundbreaking research. But why was it on the floor, near the rupture point, in such a fragmented state? It didn't fit a simple lab accident. My initial searches for commercial manufacturers yielded nothing. This wasn't off the shelf. This was custom, proprietary. My internal database cross-referenced its unique spectral signature, its precise molecular weight, its specific thermal degradation profile against known research and development entities. The results trickled in, a slow, deliberate unveiling. One name surfaced repeatedly, a subsidiary of Omnicorp, specializing in advanced materials for secure environments. The same Omnicorp that had been so quick to dismiss my concerns. A flicker of satisfaction, cold and sharp, ignited in my chest. I was right. This wasn't an accident. This was engineered. I left the suite late that night, the city lights blurring into streaks as I drove. My mind was still dissecting the polymer, each chemical bond, each manufacturing imperfection. I was so engrossed, I almost didn't register the sudden, blinding flash of headlights in my rearview mirror. A heavy sedan, dark and aggressive, swerved out from behind me, pulling alongside. Too close. The driver's side window was tinted, impenetrable. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Without warning, the sedan veered sharply into my lane, forcing me to brake hard, my tires squealing in protest. The sudden jolt threw my body against the seatbelt. I wrestled the wheel, correcting the skid just as the sedan sped away, disappearing into the night. It wasn't an accident. The maneuver had been too deliberate, too precise. A message. A warning. My jaw clenched. Someone knew I was getting too close. The next morning, I arrived at my personal workspace, a small, secure lab within the FBI building, separate from the general examination suites. It was my sanctuary, where I kept my most sensitive findings, my own custom equipment. The lock was untouched, the security seal unbroken. Everything appeared normal. But as I stepped inside, a faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted to me, a metallic tang, like freshly cut copper, mixed with something else, something subtly chemical. It wasn't the usual aroma of my lab. My gaze swept the room, my internal alarm bells ringing silently. The microscopic dust on my workbench, which I meticulously left undisturbed, seemed dot-shifted. A single, almost invisible scratch marked the polished surface of my high-resolution mass spectrometer. And then I saw it, a tiny, silver-gray filament, no thicker than a human hair, caught on the edge of a data port. It wasn't mine. It wasn't from any of my samples. Someone had been in my lab. Someone had been looking. Not just for information, but for me. The near miss on the road, the breach of my personal space, they weren't isolated incidents. They were a coordinated escalation. I bagged the filament, careful not to contaminate it, and sent it for immediate analysis. My determination solidified into something hard and unyielding. They wanted to scare me off. They had only succeeded in making me more resolute. Later that afternoon, a quiet knock at my door startled me. It was Maya, Thorne's research assistant. Her hands twisted nervously at her sides. "I have to tell you something." I motioned him to a chair, sensing the tremor in his words. "Take your time, Maya." "What is it?" She wrung her hands. "After the Omnicorp meeting, after you asked about the polymer, I started thinking about everything. And something came back to me. Something I pushed down." She swallowed hard. "About a week before Dr. Thorne died. I was working late, in the main lab. I was finishing up some data entry, and Dr. Thorne had already left. Or, I thought he had." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I heard movement. Not in the main lab, but in the secure chamber, the one with the containment systems. The one where he kept his most sensitive projects. I knew he was particular about who accessed it, especially after hours. I thought maybe he'd come back for something, but his office light was off. So I just stayed quiet." My gaze sharpened, moving past the frosted glass of the secure chamber. Tall. Not Dr. Thorne. He was shorter. This person. They moved with a kind of confidence, like they knew exactly where they were going. And they were in there for a long time. I heard faint sounds, a low hum, like machinery, but different from the usual lab equipment. And then, they left. through the private exit Dr. Thorne used. I never saw their face. The pieces clicked into place with an unnerving precision. An unknown individual, accessing Thorne's most secure lab after hours, just days before the explosion, just days before the anomalous polymer appeared. And then the attempts to intimidate me. "Why didn't you say anything before, Maya?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She looked up, her fear palpable. "I was scared, Reed. Dr. Thorne was so secretive about that project. He warned me, repeatedly, about the implications if anyone else knew. And after what happened, I just wanted to forget it. But now, with what you're finding, and the way things are happening, I feel like I have to. I have to tell you." I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "You did the right thing, Maya." The previous night's revelation, the distinct impression of a deliberate shadow, had only sharpened my focus. I sat hunched over the terminal, the glowing screens before me a tapestry of data logs, security footage timestamps, and environmental sensor readouts from Thorne's lab. The initial reports had painted a picture of a catastrophic accident, a tragic miscalculation by a brilliant mind. But my gut, honed by years of sifting through the debris of human intent, screamed otherwise. The microscopic traces, the anomalous burn pattern, they were discordant notes in an otherwise harmonious symphony of destruction. Now, it was time to dissect that symphony, to find the sour notes hidden within the digital score. My fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through layers of encrypted protocols. I started with the lab's environmental control system. Thorne's work was sensitive, demanding precise atmospheric conditions. Every fluctuation, every gas mixture, was meticulously logged. I scrolled through weeks of data, looking for anything out of place. Most of it was routine, oxygen levels maintained, inert gases purged, temperature stable within half a degree. Then, a flicker. A minute deviation, 3 days before the incident. An oxygen scrubber initiated a purge cycle, but it wasn't a full cycle. It terminated prematurely, leaving a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the atmospheric composition. A phantom purge. I flagged it, a tiny anomaly in a sea of normalcy. It wasn't enough to cause an explosion, not on its own, but it was there. And it wasn't recorded as a malfunction. The system logged it as a commanded action, executed and completed. A ghost in the machine, following orders. Next, I pulled up the security system logs. Access points, motion detectors, thermal imaging. Nothing. No unauthorized entry, no breach of the perimeter. The lab was a fortress, and Thorne was the only one with the key. Or so it seemed. I cross-referenced the environmental anomaly with the security logs. No correlation. The phantom purge happened when Thorne was present, working, according to the biometrics. My gaze drifted to the data from Thorne's primary experimental apparatus. This was the heart of his research, a bespoke system he'd engineered himself. Its operational parameters were complex, its energy demands immense. I knew from the physical reconstruction that this apparatus had been the focal point of the explosion. The burn patterns radiated outwards from it, the structural integrity of the chamber compromised precisely at its core. I zoomed into the apparatus's power conduit logs. Standard operating procedures dictated specific energy. Fluctuations, peaks, and troughs, all tied to Thorne's research cycles. But nestled within the expected data, I found it. A spike. Not a power surge, not a brownout. This was a brief, controlled overload. A specific, targeted jolt of energy, precisely timed. It wasn't enough to trip the circuit breakers immediately, but it was enough to stress the system, to push it to its breaking point. And the timestamp of this overload? It coincided with the final moments before the catastrophic event. It also, chillingly, occurred approximately 30 seconds after the phantom atmospheric purge, which had subtly altered the ambient conditions. This wasn't an accident. This was a choreographed sequence, a deliberate, multi-stage manipulation. I brought up the schematics of Thorne's lab, overlaid with the digital data points. I began to reconstruct the sequence of events, not as a random occurrence, but as a meticulously planned attack. Stage 1, the atmospheric alteration. The phantom purge. It was subtle, designed to deplete a specific gas or introduce a minute contaminant, creating a volatile environment, a primer for what was to come. It wouldn't have been noticeable to Thorne, absorbed as he was in his work. It was a silent, invisible hand preparing the stage. Stage 2, the targeted overload. The precise jolt of energy sent through the experimental apparatus. Not a random malfunction, but a calculated stressor, designed to react violently with the newly compromised atmosphere. The system wasn't just overloaded, it was triggered. Stage 3, the catastrophic event. The resulting explosion, carefully engineered to mimic a research malfunction. The apparatus, already weakened by the subtle atmospheric shift and then slammed with an intentional power surge, gave way spectacularly. The scene was set, the evidence planted, the victim eliminated, all while appearing to be a tragic consequence of his own groundbreaking, dangerous work. The sophistication of it was staggering. Someone hadn't just sabotaged the lab, they had re-engineered an accident. They understood Thorne's protocols, his bespoke systems, the delicate balance of his experimental setup. They knew exactly how to make his tools turn against him, how to make the lab itself his executioner. But how was it triggered? I scoured the network logs again. The lab's internal network was isolated, a closed loop. But there was a single, encrypted external port, a rarely used diagnostic access point. It showed activity. A brief, untraceable data packet, a single command issued, then gone. My jaw tightened. This wasn't the work of a disgruntled colleague or a corporate spy with a rudimentary understanding. This required an intimate, expert knowledge of Thorne's specific research, the exact vulnerabilities of his unique apparatus, and the intricate workings of the lab's environmental and security systems. Someone had painstakingly studied Thorne, not just his work, but his very methodology, his specific routines, even the subtle quirks of his custom-built equipment. The trail wasn't just burning, it was an inferno. This wasn't just murder, it was an intellectual assassination, orchestrated by a mind as sharp and as twisted as Thorne's own. And now, I had to find them. I sat hunched over, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes, a half-empty mug of lukewarm coffee beside my keyboard. My initial assessment, the one that leaned towards a tragic miscalculation or a desperate act, felt utterly inadequate now. The method of Thorne's demise, the precise manipulation of the lab's volatile systems to create an explosion that wiped clean almost every trace, spoke of a mind far more calculating than a simple thief or a despairing genius. No, this wasn't about stealing his research, it was about silencing it. Or, more precisely, preventing its completion, its release, its very existence from reaching the light of day. The sheer complexity of the execution suggested a motive far deeper than mere profit from intellectual property. He didn't want his work stolen, I murmured to the empty room, the words tasting stale on my tongue. He wanted it buried. This new hypothesis felt like a cold draft creeping up my spine. Something that threatened an entity powerful enough to orchestrate such an elaborate cover-up. The stakes had just ratcheted up, from a singular act of violence to something far more systemic. I returned my attention to the digital ghost of Thorne's work. I had already scoured his primary research files, his published papers, his correspondence with colleagues. All seemed to align with the public narrative of a brilliant bioengineer pushing the boundaries of cellular regeneration. But if my new theory held, the truth had to be hidden deeper, perhaps in a place Thorne himself had designed to be inaccessible. Find me the cracks, I told myself, my fingers dancing across the keyboard. I started a deeper dive into his personal system backups, looking for anomalies, for encrypted partitions that didn't link to the main project directories. The digital forensics expert, a young woman with an uncanny knack for unearthing buried data, had given me administrative access to Thorne's entire drive image earlier that morning. He was meticulous, Reed, he'd warned, pushing him glasses up him nose. If he hid something, it's going to be good. Meticulous, indeed. Hours blurred into a monotonous cycle of parsing data logs, cross-referencing file creation dates, and sifting through layers of routine system maintenance. The cool air of the suite, usually a relief, now felt like an icy blanket. My eyes burned, but I refused to break focus. Thorne wasn't just working on something groundbreaking, he was working on something dangerous, or something that exposed danger. My gut clenched at the thought. Then, a flicker. A small, unindexed partition, nestled within what appeared to be an old, archived operating system backup. It wasn't just encrypted, it was cloaked, designed to appear as corrupted data to any casual scan. Thorne had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide this. I called over the digital forensics expert. Take a look at this, I said, pointing to the obscure sector on my screen. It's not just locked, it's practically invisible. She leaned closer, her brow furrowing. Well, I'll be damned. That's sophisticated. The server hum intensified, a low groan as the processor strained. The progress bar crept forward, agonizingly slow. Each percentage point felt like a lifetime. What do you think he hid in there? She asked, not looking at me, her gaze fixed on the screen. Something he believed was worth dying for, I replied, the words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the encryption cracked. A single directory appeared, labeled only ethics_logs_final. I clicked it open, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, a series of dated entries, text files, and audio recordings. I opened the first text file. Thorne's words filled the screen, stark and urgent. He detailed growing concerns about the potential weaponization of his regenerative discoveries. But it was the later entries, the most recent ones, that truly slammed into me. He wasn't just worried about his own work. He had uncovered evidence that Omnicorp, the very corporation that had funded his state-of-the-art lab and provided him with unparalleled resources, was clandestinely funding a separate, far more dangerous project. A project that leveraged similar bioengineering principles, not for healing, but for control, for strategic advantage. He explicitly stated his intent to expose their actions, to bring their clandestine operations into the public eye, even if it meant sacrificing his career, perhaps even his life. He had scheduled a meeting, a leak to a prominent investigative journalist, set for the following week. Omnicorp. Thorne hadn't been a victim of a lab accident, or even a rival. I was no longer just investigating a murder, I was staring down a conspiracy. Hours had blurred into an indistinguishable stretch, marked only by the shifting patterns on my multiple monitors and the growing ache in my shoulders. The server Aris Thorne had so meticulously protected, the one the analyst had finally cracked, was a treasure trove, each byte a potential clue. I had initiated a comprehensive cross-referencing protocol, a digital dragnet designed to sift through every piece of relevant data. First, the access logs for Thorne's lab, a labyrinth of keycard entries, biometric scans, and network logins. Then, the complete employee profiles for Omnicorp's research division, focusing on those with clearance levels high enough to even breathe the same air as Thorne's most sensitive projects. Finally, I overlaid those with a matrix of specific technical expertise, advanced cryogenics, quantum-level computational forensics, and, crucially, a deep understanding of proprietary neural network architectures. The sabotage wasn't random, it was surgical, requiring an intimate knowledge of Thorne's unique system vulnerabilities. The initial sweep yielded hundreds of names. Too many. I adjusted the parameters, filtering for individuals who possessed all three expertise categories, then for those whose access logs showed activity within a critical 24-hour window leading up to the incident. The screen flickered, the number shrinking dramatically. 50. Then 15. Then, a tight cluster of 7. My gaze sharpened, the fatigue momentarily forgotten. These 7 individuals were the only ones who possessed the keys, the knowledge, and the opportunity. I began to dive into each of their profiles, a meticulous, almost forensic examination of their digital lives. Educational backgrounds, previous employers, performance reviews, even old social media footprints, anything that could paint a fuller picture. Most were brilliant, dedicated researchers, their careers a steady climb through the academic and corporate ranks. But one profile snagged my attention, a subtle dissonance in the otherwise uniform symphony of credentials. The Omnicorp liaison, a man whose role was to facilitate communication and resource allocation between Thorne's reclusive division and the larger corporation, had a remarkably sparse early career record. Where others had detailed internships and junior positions, his read like a redacted document. A 2-year gap after his undergraduate degree, followed by a sudden, high-level entry into a government-adjacent tech firm. It was unusual, almost too clean. My fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating a deeper background search, bypassing the standard corporate HR files and tapping into more obscure government databases. The system churned, a low, persistent hum from the tower beneath my desk. A notification pinged. I clicked, and a cascade of information unfolded. The 2-year gap wasn't empty, it was filled with highly classified training. The liaison had a background in covert operations, specializing in secure systems infiltration and intelligence gathering. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. A corporate liaison with a black ops past? It was an immediate, jarring red flag. My focus narrowed exclusively to his file. I scrolled further, searching for anything else that might connect him to Thorne, or to the specific nature of the sabotage. And then, I found it. A cross-referenced entry, buried deep within an archived security clearance review from years prior. It wasn't directly related to his current role at Omnicorp, but to a previous position with a subsidiary. The entry flagged a historical incident, a high-profile intellectual property theft case that had rocked the tech world a decade ago. A brilliant, young bioengineer's groundbreaking research, similar in scope to Thorne's, had been stolen and sold to a rival nation-state. The investigation had been quietly closed, no arrests made, the trail gone cold. But the liaison's name was in the periphery of that old case file. My mind raced, connecting the dots. He hadn't just been a consultant, he had been intricately involved in the post-mortem analysis of the stolen research. He would have gained intimate knowledge of the vulnerabilities exploited, the methods used to extract the data, and the specific kind of security protocols that had failed. More importantly, he would have seen firsthand the immense value of such research, and the potential for a quiet, untraceable acquisition. The tension in the examination suite tightened around me, a palpable presence. This wasn't just about a past job, it was about a pattern, a skill set, and a proximity to a similar, devastating event. He wasn't just capable, he had a template. He had witnessed the perfect crime before, from the inside. Someone who had honed that craft. The Omnicorp liaison. David Thorne, no relation. He wasn't just a person of interest anymore. He was the prime suspect. The pieces were falling into place, cold and sharp. I leaned back, the worn leather of my chair creaking softly, and surveyed the digital breadcrumbs I'd painstakingly laid. The bait was subtle, a phantom signal. I'd crafted a dummy data file, embedding a fabricated report on Aris Thorne's servers, one that hinted at a critical breakthrough in his synthetic protein research, a specific sequence, designated Project Chimera C, that Aris had supposedly just stabilized. The report detailed not only its potential for rapid cellular regeneration but, crucially, its unforeseen compatibility with a highly volatile, previously unstable delivery agent. Anyone with a passing familiarity with Aris's work would dismiss it as early-stage speculation. But the killer, someone intimately acquainted with the true, darker trajectory of Aris's research, would recognize the chilling implications, the final piece of the bioweapon puzzle. My target, David Thorne, Aris's brother and a senior executive at Omnicorp, was a man who moved with the quiet confidence of inherited power. He had a legitimate reason to be interested in his brother's legacy, to request access to the digital archives. I had granted it, under careful surveillance. The digital trap was set to alert me the moment that specific file, among hundreds, was accessed. I didn't expect him to just read it, I expected him to panic and act. The alert flashed on my secondary monitor just before midnight. A surge of adrenaline tightened my jaw. David Thorne, operating from a remote terminal, had indeed accessed Project Chimera C. He hadn't just viewed it, he'd attempted to delete it, then, failing that, initiated a script designed to corrupt the entire directory structure. A clumsy, desperate move that confirmed my suspicion. He understood exactly what that breakthrough meant. I killed the main lights, plunging my section of the suite into a deeper twilight, leaving only the glow of my monitors and the distant, clinical hum of the servers. I waited, a ghost in the machine's shadow. My intuition, honed over years of dissecting crime scenes, told me a digital sabotage wouldn't be enough for him. He'd want physical confirmation, a direct intervention. Less than an hour later, the security camera feed I was monitoring flickered silhouetted against the emergency exit light, moved with practiced stealth through the main corridor. David Thorne. He moved past the unmanned reception desk, his gaze sweeping the empty cubicles, then honed in on my workstation. This was it. He slipped into my section, moving with an unnatural grace for a corporate executive. He carried a small, flat device, a data scrambler, I presumed. He approached my desk, his eyes darting to the monitors, then to the external hard drive I had deliberately left connected, containing a mirror of Aris's Project Chimeracy files. He reached for it, his fingers brushing the cool metal. Looking for something specific, He froze, his hand recoiling as if burned. He spun, his face a mask of shock and fear in the dim light. His eyes, wide and disoriented, searched for me. His features hardening. I don't know what you're talking about. I was just checking on the progress of the investigation. Concerned about my brother's legacy. He gestured vaguely at my workstation. Saw your light was on. At this hour? And with a data scrambler in your hand? I countered, stepping closer. That's a rather aggressive way to check on progress. His jaw tightened. It's a misunderstanding. I have a right to be here. You have a right to be here as a witness, perhaps. Not as an saboteur. I walked to my desk, picked up a sealed evidence bag. Inside, a shard of iridescent, almost clear material glinted under the faint light. This is a unique synthetic polymer, Mr. Thorne. It was developed in Aris's lab, specifically for a highly specialized containment system for volatile biological agents. A system Aris was developing in secret, parallel to his public research. I paused, letting the information sink in. We found microscopic traces of it embedded in the burn patterns around Aris's body, inconsistent with the supposed catastrophic lab accident. We also found it at 3 other locations: the abandoned warehouse where the biocontainment breach occurred last year, the dock where the contaminated waste was supposedly disposed of, and the underground bunker where the experimental trials were being conducted. The same polymer. The same signature. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. This polymer, Mr. Thorne, is exceptionally rare. Only a handful of people knew about its existence, let alone its precise application. You were one of them. You were also the project manager overseeing Aris's ancillary research, the one that supposedly had nothing to do with bioweapon development. I held up another evidence bag. This one containing a fragment of a torn lab coat. And we found the same polymer fibers, fused into the fabric. On a lab coat recovered from your private office at Omnicorp. A coat that had been thoroughly washed, but not thoroughly enough. He stumbled back, hitting a server rack with a dull clang. The carefully constructed facade shattered. Not the whole company, a faction. Aris. Aris found out what they were doing. He was building a bioweapon, not a cure. He developed the Chimeracy sequence, but not for regeneration. It was designed to accelerate a pathogen, make it undetectable until it was too late. He was going to expose them, expose the entire project. He had the data, the proof. His voice cracked, raw with a mix of fear and self-loathing. They tasked me. Said if I didn't neutralize him, they'd neutralize my entire family. My wife, my children. I had no choice. I knew his protocols, his lab. I introduced the destabilizer when he was running a critical test. The polymer was from the containment unit I had to breach to get close enough. It was the only way. With the intention of making it look like a tragic oversight, David Thorne finished, his voice finally giving out, collapsing into a heap of shuddering sobs. The silence in the interrogation room was thick, heavy with the weight of his words. I stared at him, my mind reeling. The meticulous planning, the intimate knowledge of the lab's intricacies, the cold precision of the act, all to protect his family from an unseen hand. It was a motive I could almost grasp, a desperate measure, but it didn't lessen the profound betrayal of his brother. A uniformed officer moved in swiftly, his movements practiced and efficient. David Thorne offered no resistance, allowing the cuffs to be secured around his wrists. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and vacant, a ghost of the man I'd seen in photographs. Omnicorp doesn't forget. I watched him being led away, the metallic click of the door echoing in the empty space. My colleague, the lead interrogator, walked over, running a hand through his hair. He cracked faster than I expected once you laid out the evidence. The truth was a messy, dangerous thing. The next few days were a blur of activity. The confession of David Thorne, detailing the coercion and the methods, blew the lid off the initial investigation. It wasn't just a brother's desperate act, it was a symptom of a much larger, more insidious disease. My report, now supplemented by David Thorne's testimony, became the bedrock for a series of high-profile arrests. Executives at Omnicorp, their names once synonymous with innovation and power, were now being paraded before cameras, their faces a mix of defiance and disbelief. The lead investigator, a stern woman from the Corporate Crimes Division, kept me updated. We're tracing the threats, they David mentioned. The suite, usually a quiet domain of methodical analysis, now buzzed with a frenetic energy. My desk was buried under new evidence requests, updated reports, and digital files detailing the expanding web of the conspiracy. I revisited the initial lab accident scene photos, the burn patterns, the microscopic traces of the destabilizer David Thorne had used. The almost perfect execution, designed to mimic a catastrophic but accidental failure, was a testament to his desperation and his intimate knowledge of his brother's work. The media, of course, had a field day. Omnicorp scandal rocks financial markets, blared one headline. The ethics of innovation, who controls the future, questioned another. Television screens in the suite's break room constantly flickered with images of news anchors discussing the Thorne affair. Pundits debated the implications of Dr. Aris Thorne's research, a project still largely under wraps but now thrust into the global spotlight. My name, Reed, was sometimes mentioned, usually as the forensic investigator who uncovered the true nature of the tragedy. It felt alien, detached. My job was to find the facts, not to be a talking point. The public reaction was a volatile mix of shock and outrage. The ethical debate surrounding scientific advancement and corporate responsibility raged on every platform. Was Dr. Thorne's research, whatever its final form, too powerful for any single entity to control? The implications of a technology that could potentially reshape global energy, medicine, or even conflict, were now laid bare for the world to see and fear. My own thoughts kept returning to the lab, to the meticulous order Dr. Thorne had maintained, the life he had built around his work. He had been so close to something monumental, and it had cost him everything. I remembered the subtle signs, the faint scent of ozone that wasn't quite right, the almost imperceptible discoloration on a piece of melted equipment. The lead investigator from corporate crimes stopped by my desk, his expression grim. "The pressure is immense, Reed. Governments, international organizations, everyone wants a piece of Thorne's research now. Omnicorp's assets are frozen, but the data, the prototypes. It's a goldmine, and everyone wants control. What happens to it?" I asked, looking up from a magnified image of a circuit board. She shook her head. "That's the million-dollar question. It's too sensitive, too potentially world-changing, to simply be shelved. But who decides its fate? And who ensures it's used for good, not ill?" Her eyes met mine, a shared understanding of the precarious precipice we now stood upon. We had solved a murder, but in doing so, we had unleashed a torrent of far greater questions, questions that would haunt the world long after the headlines faded. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that the true aftermath of Dr. Thorne's death was only just beginning. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the FBI Forensic Science Division examination suite was the only sound, a low, steady drone that had become the soundtrack to my life. Files, neatly stacked and labeled with the Thorne case number, sat on the polished steel table before me. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solutions and old paper. I ran a gloved hand over the cover of the final report, the weight of it familiar, yet heavier now with the full story contained within. It had taken weeks after that conversation with the forensic analyst, weeks of painstaking reconstruction, cross-referencing, and relentless pressure. The microscopic trace, that anomalous metallic residue I'd found near the damaged console, had been the key. It wasn't just a random contaminant, it was a unique alloy, patented years ago by a rival bioengineering firm, one that had been aggressively trying to acquire Thorne's groundbreaking research. The unusual burn pattern, initially dismissed as a secondary effect of the catastrophic meltdown, was, in fact, the signature of a highly localized, precisely directed energy pulse, a pulse capable of initiating the chain reaction that consumed the lab, and Thorne with it. The perpetrator, we discovered, was not some shadowy corporate espionage agent, but an executive within Thorne's own company, a director of research who had once been a close associate, even a mentor. He'd seen Thorne's work not as a scientific triumph for humanity, but as a personal goldmine, a shortcut to unparalleled power and wealth. Thorne's refusal to weaponize or commercialize his discovery prematurely sealed his fate. The director had cultivated an intimate understanding of Thorne's lab, its security protocols, and most critically, the precise vulnerabilities of the experimental apparatus. He'd used that knowledge to trigger a meticulously planned accident, then vanished into the corporate labyrinth, almost completely scrubbing his digital footprint. Almost. My gaze drifted to the large monitor displaying the final, enhanced image of that metallic trace, barely a micron across, yet a universe of intent. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about control, about the terrifying arrogance of believing one could wield such power without consequence. The director hadn't just murdered a man, he'd attempted to steal the very future Thorne envisioned, twist it for his own gain, and then bury the evidence under a mountain of scientific debris. The case was closed, officially. The director was in custody, his meticulously constructed alibi crumbling under the weight of forensic evidence and the testimony of several junior researchers who had grown suspicious of his sudden interest in Thorne's specific experimental parameters. Justice, in its slow, methodical way, had been served. But the feeling of resolution was tempered by a profound unease, a lingering chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the suite. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Read." I turned, seeing the lead investigator, a veteran with tired eyes and a perpetually rumpled suit, standing in the doorway. He held a steaming mug. "Just reflecting," I admitted, gesturing vaguely at the reports. "Thorne's work. It was too important to be left to chance, or to greed." The investigator nodded, stepping inside and leaning against a workbench, his presence a solid, grounding force. "The ethics of it all. That's the real monster in this story, isn't it? Not just the killer, but the potential for scientific progress to be corrupted." "Exactly," I said, the word a quiet exhale. Thorne was trying to solve a problem that could change everything. And someone decided it was theirs to own, theirs to exploit. It makes you question the very fabric of discovery, doesn't it? Where do you draw the line? Who decides what's too dangerous to pursue, or too vital to withhold? The questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable, echoing the forensic analyst's earlier query about the fate of Thorne's research. It was still under lock and key, too volatile to dismantle, too valuable to ignore. A committee of experts was being assembled, a testament to the immense implications of Thorne's final project. But the danger remained, not just from external threats, but from the inherent human capacity for ambition to overshadow responsibility. I felt the familiar ache behind my eyes, a weariness that went beyond lack of sleep. The meticulous dissection of crime scenes, the reconstruction of fatal moments, the pursuit of truth through microscopic fragments, it wasn't just a job. It was an immersion, a constant confrontation with the depths of malice and the fragility of life. But then I looked at the reports again, at the clean lines of the conclusion, the irrefutable evidence that had brought a killer to light. And the weariness receded, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. This was why I did it. The pursuit of justice, even in the face of such profound ethical dilemmas, was the only antidote to chaos. It was the only way to honor Thorne's vision, even if his life had been cut short by those who sought to pervert it. For now. He pushed off the workbench. There's a new file on your desk. Something about an abandoned factory and an unusual combustion residue. Sounds like another quiet Friday. I felt a spark, a familiar flicker of professional curiosity igniting in the quiet corners of my mind. The world of forensic investigation was a relentless tide, always bringing new mysteries to shore. There was no true end, only transitions. I nodded, a faint smile touching my lips. Sounds like it. I stood, leaving the Thorne reports for processing, and walked towards the door, the hum of the suite fading behind me. The struggle between progress and peril was far from over, but for now, another truth awaited its unveiling.